I started having a discussion with a viewer on another video, and he challenged me to debate on the cosmological argument for God. Well, we've kind of gone back and forth a couple of times in email, and he still hasn't produced his argument, even though I've encouraged him time and time again to do so. Therefore, instead of waiting for something that might very well not ever happen, I decided to take a look at the cosmological argument as opposed to William Lane Craig's Kalam cosmological argument and see if it holds any water. So let's get started. Now, there are a lot of versions of this argument going all the way back to Plato, who first argued for a first cause. Similar ideas were held by many others, both Christian and Islamic philosophers throughout the centuries, right up to Thomas Aquinas, from whom most modern versions, including Craig's Kalam version, are drawn. And because they all come from the same faulty source material, they all have the same problems, and they're all dispatched using the same methods. So let's go back to Aquinas as the most influential of them all. What he came up with is called the argument from contingency, and in general, it can be stated thusly. Many things in the universe may either exist or not exist. Such things are called contingent beings. It is impossible for everything in the universe to be contingent, for then there would be a time when nothing existed, and so nothing would exist now, since there would be nothing to bring anything into existence, which is clearly false. Therefore, there must be a necessary being whose existence is not contingent on any other being or beings. This being is whom we call God. So if we look at the first statement, that things may either exist or not exist, that's clearly true. In fact, we can't come up with anything that this does not fit. Anything, the universe included, may either exist or not exist. The fact that it does exist doesn't say that it must exist. We are aware of nothing at all that must demonstrably exist. The set of things that are non-contingent is a null set. Therefore, this argument simply invents, out of whole cloth, the concept of non-contingent entities as a solution to a problem that doesn't really exist in the first place. So let's move on to the next statement. It is impossible for everything in the universe to be contingent because there would be a time when nothing existed, and that means nothing would exist now. Well, clearly that's not the case. We know that the universe as we know it does exist, and that there was a time about 13.8 billion years ago when the universe did not exist. So this statement is factually incorrect. The universe did go from nothing, or at least from an unknown prior state, into existence. This is what led William Lane Craig to construct his alternative version to the argument from contingency, the Kalam cosmological argument, which has all the same faults. Now note what happens in statement 3. There's a sudden leap from something non-contingent must exist to a necessary being. Nothing says that even if something non-contingent must exist, it must be a being. This argument is not trying to get from logical step to logical step, it's trying to get somewhere specific, and that specific place is into Christian theology. There is nothing that says that a being or an entity must be involved. It doesn't have to be alive. It doesn't have to be conscious. It doesn't have to be sentient. And even if it may have existed at one time, nothing says it has to still exist today. You can say absolutely nothing about this necessary thing, even if you could get to that point, which, as I will show you in a moment, you can't. But you notice that in the fourth statement, they just label it God arbitrarily, betraying their intentions. So why can't you get from point A to point B in this argument? Because this argument assumes, wrongly, that the universe is all that there is, and that the physical laws that make up our universe are applicable everywhere. And that's not necessarily the case. Modern science acknowledges that there may be a near infinite number of other universes out there in the wider multiverse, and if that's true, then all of the underlying premises for all of these ridiculous arguments for God fall apart. But if I can't prove these other universes exist, doesn't that harm my refutation? Nope. It sure doesn't. And here's why. The theist is simply making a pile of unsupported assumptions upon which they're basing their claims. So long as the assumptions are held to be true, the claims appear to be reasonable. But if you start calling those assumptions into question, the whole thing comes tumbling down like a house of cards. All you have to do is call those assumptions into doubt. I don't have to prove my doubts are factually correct. I just have to point out that theirs might not be correct. Because if you look at it, their entire argument is, because X and Y are true, Z must be true. But Z is true if and only if X and Y are true, and because they cannot demonstrate that they are, and they don't even try, their conclusions are only as good as their premises. I can come up with a very simple scenario which totally demolishes the contingency argument. Now, we know that our universe started in a Big Bang. We have no idea what happened before that, so I can assert that the universe has gone through an uncountable number of bangs and crashes throughout its history. Every time it bangs again, a different set of physical laws come into existence. Contingency and regress goes right out the window because who knows what laws might have existed in previous incarnations of the universe. You can't assume that what applies in our particular universe existed in any other. In fact, since time is part and parcel with the individual universes, you can't even say that infinity is impossible. Universes may have been going through this boom and bust cycle for an infinite amount of time, if the word has any real meaning in that context. Now, I don't have to prove that any of this is true. I don't even have to prove it's possible. All I have to do is suggest that it's something that could be conceivable, and the contingency argument falls apart. It self-destructs because it makes assertions based on assumptions that may no longer be accurate. And if they're not accurate, the argument doesn't work. It doesn't have to be a continually banging and crashing scenario. I can make up thousands of other possibilities, and every single one refutes the cosmological argument because the cosmological argument requires that one and only one possibility exists. And as soon as that assumption isn't true, the whole thing blows up in the face of believers. And that's really the problem with all of these philosophical arguments for God. They rely on assertion, not observation. They take something that sounds good to the untrained ear, but doesn't hold up to a moment's rational scrutiny. I said something that got a lot of argument from my debate partner. I said that logic can make bad arguments, or false arguments, sound true. And this is just one example. You can take a logical syllogism that works perfectly well, add in some unwarranted premises, and come up with a bad conclusion that will fool a lot of gullible people. They follow the proper logical form, but they go from a bad place and end up in a bad place. And a lot of people will take them seriously, even though they shouldn't. It isn't just the cosmological argument that fails like this. All of them do. The whole of the philosophical arguments for God are just as bad, starting from bad premises, following bad assumptions and assertions, to bad conclusions. And that's why the only people who take them seriously are people who are already emotionally invested in their conclusions. These arguments don't actually get you anywhere. They don't actually prove anything. They just show how gullible some people are willing to be in order to get to an emotionally comforting end. And people ought to know better. It's really sad that many do not.